So I read To Kill a Mockingbird, the great American modern classic by Harper Lee, a book that has never gone out of print and is still required reading in a lot of schools until this present day. So what makes this book so great then? It deals with themes of coming of age, alienation, societal expectation and racial difference in some degree, as well as progressivism in the face of a regressive environment and society, seeing as this takes place in the American South and a lot of the baggage from the 19th century was still being held on to. It does so in a surprisingly personal way. It really draws the reader in, and there's nothing cold or technical about it. It's just a story of a young girl and her personal experience in that South, and through that perspective she tackles that. This is something I found most fascinating about the book, which really elevates this into the god tier of books, and I really understand why this is still being held in so high regards. And for me, the distinctive quality of the book is this: perspective. The book is written in first person from the perspective of Scout, a daughter of a lawyer who has to take on a very important case in the South. There's a black man being accused of taking advantage of a white woman, and through racist prejudice in the South, against all evidence, he has already been condemned and found guilty by everyone. Lee brilliantly manages to bridge the gap between a reflecting older woman and a young girl, and she does so seamlessly. It's a very fluent narration. At times it switches between things that the character itself cannot know, i.e. her explaining that this is something she did not pick up on when she was at that age, but at other times she's brilliantly explaining her thought process of what it was like to be that young girl, and she doesn't explicitly state this is the way I thought back then, but she just outright says the way that she perceives it, and you obviously through context know that this is a very uninformed and young opinion that just happens during child play, right? For example, being very concerned about a ball that has gotten into the garden of someone else. I mean, that doesn't actually happen in the book. I forgot the specific examples. But there's a lot of children playing going on there. It does feel really, really natural. Like an actual child might recount this in the exact way. And then, like 2 pages later, there is a very informed analysis of behaviors examined by the townspeople. And it just melds together so very well. It's really impressive how this is done, because if this was done wrong or handled in an unskillful manner, then it would be utterly jarring to essentially head hop between a really young girl and an older woman. But it does work, strangely enough. I think this is where I would lay my majority of the praise on. Of course, at the same time, it's also a very emotionally involved story, and it is told in a very personal way. Coming into this book, as a bit of a background for me, I actually just wanted to watch the movie. I'm supremely interested in the movie, but I don't really like watching movies based on other media without having first reviewed that other media. Of course, I don't do that for all media, but specifically in this case, I just thought it would be fun reading the book before watching the movie, and I haven't watched the movie yet, but I'm absolutely enamored with the book. The only thing I didn't really like was the awkward climax. I mean, since slice of life type of books aren't really common in the Western world, the author felt it necessary to somehow amp up the ante and to have like a dramatic showdown at the end where the vindictive neighbor of them tries to take revenge on the young children, which, might happen, might not happen, didn't really add anything to this otherwise very, very, very good book. But I also don't think it really took away from it. It's just, I don't know, maybe it muddies the waters, maybe it is a way of essentially like Trojan horsing these ideas in through having a traditional narrative. You're invested in the book, you want to finish it, and the themes kind of fester in your mind after that. For me personally, I really didn't need that, and I don't think I could say it took away from the book, but I really, in the end, it felt like it meandered along a bit too long for me, but it's the way the author thought it would work best, and who am I to tell her otherwise? She has sold so many books, so she must be doing something right, and maybe I'm just not seeing it. The townspeople are all interesting characters whom are given life to by rather exciting prose. The descriptions, they are just fun to read, and while reading the book you really feel like that actually could be a town, and you immerse yourself in it. At the same time, all of the themes are very human. As I said, there is coming of age. She's on the cusp of being a woman. She's right before or during the early stages of her puberty, where her eventual path in life is being determined, and her being described as a bit of a tomboy does not really meet the societal expectations that are laid upon her. At the same time, it's loss of innocence. It's the idea that you're young and carefree, and then something terrible happens from the outside, and you realize that your dad is not going to be around forever to protect you from outside influences, and that the world really is a horrible place, and it's not all fun and games that you have in your yard. And it actually can be quite anxiety-inducing for a kid, seeing that for the first time. I think there is a formative moment when she's at the trial, where her lawyer dad defends the black man who is being falsely accused. And she just sees something that is obviously wrong. Everybody in a way knows it's wrong, but they go through with it anyway, because the systems that be are not to be disturbed. And Atticus Finch is the perfect stoic, who is just weathering the storm and does what he has to do. He's a stand-up guy. He's a really great character. I do hear that he has inspired a lot of lawyers to become lawyers, because apparently lawyers with morals are a thing now. You do feel somewhat helpless during the book, but I think this description of helplessness is exactly what the character experiences at times. It's a loss of agency, but also it's a stage where she will gain agency eventually, and it does feel a little bit overwhelming. So in essence, I think it's a good thing that it's required reading. The racism angle that is put on it these days is, of course, there. The themes are obvious. But I don't really think it's the main focus of the book, or what makes the book so great. Of course, it's a brave discussion to have. You have to, of course, take into account the time where this book was published, which was in the 1940s, if I recall correctly. At least this is the time where it was written. Exploring this is also kind of brave. Of course, today it's kind of obvious we wouldn't have these sorts of mistrials. But, we should be aware of it, especially in America where this takes place, and there has been this history of this black and white divide. Prison system, for example, still disfavors blacks over whites, be that in part to structural disenfranchisement or the breakdown of the black family. Doesn't matter, it's still a problem. So it might be a good gateway for students to get into this whole debate, because it is an incredibly complex subject, and there's no easy answer to it. Obviously, race baiting and playing the victim card is one side of the problem, but structural disenfranchisement also in some forms persists until today. So what is one to do other than have a genuine conversation and take an individualist approach? At least that would be my suggestion. But I'm not here to solve racism in the USA, nor would I be so bold to assume that I could do that. I don't really have much to say about the racism being depicted in this book. It is an absolute tragedy that a man gets wrongly convicted, and as a result also unfortunately dies through being in the prison system. Of course he does carry some of the blame for it himself. He tries to escape and gets shot. Really the initial blame is to be placed on the society which imprisoned him, and it really just serves as one particular example of prejudice causing misery to an individual. I think it's important that we still continue to tell these stories, because it's kind of unfathomable for us in such a progressive world and pluralistic ideas that people were once rather radical, and it was a default. It wasn't something that people became, wasn't a mind virus, it was just the way that they experience reality, the way it has been set up. It has to do with the psychological trait of openness. The higher you are in openness, the more you're willing to accept new ideas. The lower you are in openness, the more you rely on systems that entrench themselves in societies. So it's very important to discuss these systems and talk about them. But it's also important to keep a human angle to it and not delve into a systematic critique of societies. That's what essays are for. In this literature, it deals with these themes, and anyone can take out of it whatever they want from it, because it is, as I said, essentially a human story. It comes from a human perspective, and I enjoyed it very much. And I think there's too much ideology going into it. So to briefly highlight this, let me give you an example. The way this book has been digested and analysed is of course always respective to the time it has been read and analysed, and from initial themes that really went in on the race part and perhaps the societal part, we have now reached a stage where even feminist rhetoric tries to reinterpret To Kill a Mockingbird. And with all ideologies that you apply your worldview through, you initially always skew the truth or the human element or whatever you might call the core of the story by your ideology. So if you try to read this as a story of racial dynamic, you would of course focus on the mistrial and the way blacks and whites interact in that society. If you read it as a coming-of-age novel, you would of course focus on all the themes of youthful alienation and societal pressure. And if you read it from a feminist perspective, you will look at it with many feminist arguments. Take this segment as a warning against ideology. If you a priori assume that history is to be understood as women being oppressed by men, which has only recently changed in the last 80 or 100 years through the combined efforts of women, then every single instance of gender disparity you will find will serve to corroborate your narrative. And if something does not fit, unfortunately, since in my opinion feminism doesn't really embrace a scientific method, it's disregarded. For this really disingenuous application of analysis, you can basically prove anything. Does that mean that there are no feminist themes in To Kill a Mockingbird? No, of course not. There are some. It deals with the struggle that rather individualistic and tomboyish women have. Some that don't conform to an ideal of a society. 300 years ago you had no options. I'm just bringing this point up because I read a rather disconcerting essay on a feminist website about To Kill a Mockingbird, and the examples it took really bent the original meaning of the book, at least the way I understand it. Of course it's all idiosyncratic, it's all my interpretation of it, and my biases and my ideology might influence the way I read it. But I believe that there is a central human element to it that has been disregarded in a way. The examples that are given for feminist themes, for example, are where they are during their child's play, and the brother character complains that she is becoming more and more like a girl, as if that was a bad thing. And of course he's going to say it's going to be a bad thing, because he's like 8 or something. And I don't know if you ever watched like kids in the range of 5 to 10, the genders hate each other. Boys hate girls. They don't really get along. Of course exceptions exist, but there is a lot of rough play, there's a lot of manipulation going on. It's the kind of the gender dialogue that is being played out in society just in a very rough and unfiltered form, and it doesn't really stem from assigned gender roles. It's just something that is innate, and if you have ever seen children, you will pretty much see that it is innate. So I'm putting my biological determinism ground floor in right here. I'm just saying this is the way it is. Because of course feminism is going to argue that point and says that it's all society, it's all the patriarchy. It doesn't matter. So from this very human moment where a boy kind of teases a girl that she might not be fun anymore when she eventually evolves and mutates into this weird thing that is a woman, what does that really say? It's not a proxy for society. It's not criticism of an oppressive society. It's just a young boy that does not know how to else express his feelings, and it is meant to be a joke. At least I read it as a joke within the book. It does encapsulate the themes that she experiences in the book. That it does do. She's very often told to be moulded into a pretty girl, wear more dresses and clean herself. But I ask you, is that really the struggle that women face? Is every woman a tomboy? We have the word tomboy because it is an anomaly, because many women do conform, and I personally don't believe this is because of the immense societal pressure for them to do so. After all, the main culprits in this book who try to re-educate her are women. Women are the ones who lay the expectations on her, not men. Of course, feminism argues that this is also due to men and that they have been internalizing their misogyny, so whatever your argument is, you can't win. Men are at fault, so we just have to deal with that. But I don't want to derail this review any further and make this about feminism something. I'm just saying that ideology comes in, and through its preconceived notions it can reinterpret what the original source material is. For example, I can make the counterpoint. I could very easily use an anti-feminist view and read it into the book. The fact that by the mere word of a white woman, a black man has been convicted. So the woman holds supreme power. Even against all evidence, the man is being blamed. Of course, skin color plays a factor here, but isn't it a travesty of justice that without evidence another woman has jailed a man and essentially condemned him to death, all because she could not properly handle being rejected? Isn't it indicative how women are the babies of society who are being pampered while the men do all the hard work? This is also an equally insane and invalid point I could make. Note that I'm not making that point. I merely try to advocate that you should critically analyze the ideology that is surrounding your current time and with which you interpret literature. Because I think there are many lessons within To Kill a Mockingbird, but I don't think that they are easily reducible and solvable by a fixed set of beliefs. I think it deeply speaks to the human condition, and it takes a very unique perspective of a young girl. I think the answers to the societal pressure being expressed there is individualism. Whereas some people think that a counterculture, a countergroup, be it a sisterhood of radical feminists, or a Black Panther power group of black supremacists, or an anarchical group of nonconformists is the answer to all of society's pressure, I tell you, you are wrong. The smallest oppressed group is the individual, and I think this book, more than anything else, advocates individual responsibility. But then again, that is my ideology, and maybe I'm reading it wrong. Maybe all the themes are true. Maybe not every book is there to tell you how to act. Maybe some books are just there to be read and enjoyed. I did enjoy the book very much. I understand why it is required reading. I think young people should pay more attention to it, not regard it as a chore of something they have to read, or laugh and snigger when they have to read out the N-word aloud in class, which they have to do quite often in this book. I think because the author has picked such a personal angle, it will never be not relevant. It's a product of its time, but it is at the same time timeless. For me, it's a 10 out of 10. I recommend it highly. I enjoyed reading it. I enjoyed thinking about it afterwards. It's funny, it's charming, it's heartwarming, and I think above all, it defies interpretation. Famously, Harper Lee never gave an interview about it, never talked about the book, and she didn't have to. And it's good that she only wrote one book. The legacy stands for itself. Everyone can get something out of this. It is the multitude of interpretations. At the core, we are all human, and it's a very human story. Therefore, it works in a multitude of interpretations. I recommend To Kill a Mockingbird, and I'm probably going to go see the movie. As always, have a good one.